to talk to you about a movie called Psycho. No, 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 not that movie called Psycho. What I want to talk to you about is a 2020 film that has the same title. And lest you think that the title is some kind of a confused translation issue, no, it's intentional. The film opens with a dedication to Alfred Hitchcock, but in all honesty, this movie is much more of a homage to the artists that Hitchcock inspired, in particular the early work of Dario Argento. But throughout there's nods to Brian De Palma, Lucio Fulci, and films like The Black Belly of the Tarantula. So it takes a certain something to title your film after one of the most popular films of all time, and arguably one of the best horror films ever made. To even compare yourself with a master like Hitchcock or even Argento or Fulci, that takes something, right? That's something that most filmmakers wouldn't dare to do. This year's Psycho also owes a debt to Thomas Harris and his books that began with Red Dragon. Only in part the film adaptations. It's more than literary stylings. And that's kind of where this film really starts to pull its elements together. Because although it has a definite passion for those early 70s giallos, in a time when so many films seem to not have any kind of point of view or perspective, this one's going for a very specific look and feel. Now, it's not completely successful. At over 2.5 hours long, it is bloated, as is unfortunately more and more common with Indian films. But at the same time, it counters that because the film is shot like a painting. The cinematography here is some of the best you'll ever see. Every frame is gorgeous. Every constructed sequence is masterful. So what would I cut? Well, there's two musical segments which are not intrusive in the way that you may be used to in Bollywood productions, but they are overlong. And both of them are played for different emotional stakes than the rest of the movie. So I probably would start with cutting those down to maybe 20 seconds apiece rather than the 5-6 minutes they take up. And to be sure, the acting at times is kind of broad. With one exception, and that's the character Kamala, all the actors play their roles a little bit bigger than we're used to in America, and it's mostly down to a cultural difference in how these roles are performed. It's a little bit hard coming off of last year's Game Over, which is, in my opinion, a perfect movie. All comparisons with that film are, of course, going to be harsh towards basically anything new you see from India or anywhere in the world. So I'm trying not to do that. This feels a fair bit more like a Indian production that you'd expect, but it's also just masterful filmmaking. The villain of the piece, the psycho of the title, is a real screen monster, the kind of villain that we've been wanting back in the horror genre for a long time. He's not a supernatural boogeyman, he's just a societal monster that feels a little bit too real in some places. From his occupation to the way he handles conversation with people, which there's nothing wrong with, but there's something very wrong with. When he's in his own setting, which is a horrific murder room that would put anything in the Saw movies to shame, he takes on a cold indifference. But at the same time, he's sort of still kind of disarmingly normal with his victims. It's a very, very, very good performance. And in the climax, when that character needs to go really big, it could easily have been cartoonish. But to the actor's credit, it instead just turns into a complete berserker role, which is just infinitely impressive. All of that, but I haven't even said what the movie's about. Well, the movie, if you've seen any giallos, shouldn't be hard to figure out. Women are disappearing. When the police cannot solve the crime, falls to a musician to try and save the woman that he's in love with, who has been taken by the serial killer. There's a race against the clock as we approach her birthday, and that will also be her murder death, unless he can get there. And oh yeah, he's blind. He's assisted by his best friend and helper, and also the aforementioned Kamala, who is a paraplegic ex-cop, whose value to the investigation is both paramount and really limited. She can't do the hard physical work that would be necessary to take down a serial killer, but either can a blind man. There's a lot of that pseudo-police investigation that we used to see all the time in giallos here. And it's all just as strange and sort of off-putting and convenient as it was in Bird with Crystal Plumage or Cat of Nine Tails. So if you're the kind of person who had a problem with those movies and they're kind of sometimes wonky logic, you're going to have the same problems here. If you're nostalgic for those films, you're going to enjoy this. But it goes a little bit beyond nostalgia because the movie has a personality. And that's something that's been missing from far too many modern films. I find it hard to believe any horror fan would legitimately hate this movie. So its schoolhouse grade is a B+. I initially thought it was a B, but the more I keep thinking about it in my mind, it has more going for it than against it, and landing when it does in the history of horror, it deserves eyes. So a B+ I'm pretty comfortable with as a grade. It's in limited release, and by that I mean it's going to be in Indian specialty theaters in America, although a few chain theaters have picked up the title. I don't expect it to last long on those screens though, so if you want to see it, I'd get out to it. If you're watching this video in the future, I'm hoping that you'll search this film down. A lot of Indian horror films do end up on streaming services, and big ones too. You just need to search for them. They're not going to come up when you just turn on your set and start scrolling through titles. This one's title should be pretty easy for you to remember.